Hello, this is Jay Carpenter of the PhoneWord Forum, and today is Wednesday, December 28th, 2011. It's almost 4 p.m. Eastern, and today we have an open session of the PhoneWord Forum. We're going to be discussing some topics in the area of policy, of technology, and of business models or markets and entrepreneurship. For those of you that don't know, our last conversation was with the Australian Communications and Media Authority regarding their their open market for the equivalent of toll-free numbers in North America, but their equivalent of toll-free numbers. And that is available for review and listening by dialing 1-559-546-1390 and enter access code 175963#. And not exactly sure what number it is. Should be number 1 or 2 for the reference number. So I highly encourage you to listen to that if you haven't done so already. It was a very productive conversation in my view, and we had great participation from North American folks, as well as a great conversation with the folks from Australia regarding how it's worked for them with their open market and market-based allocation methods. So prior PhoneWord Forum calls have included Mr. Timothy Denton from the equivalents of the FCC in Canada. Hello.
Hello, Greg Fernandez here.
Hey, Greg. How are you?
How's it going, Jay? I'm right. How are you?
It's going well. Thank you for joining. So I was just doing a little introduction. So we'll wait for a few more people to hop on the call and go from there. Have you had a chance to look at any of the FCC proceedings, Greg?
In very minimally. But I'm just anxious. I'll just listen in.
Okay. Hello.
Thanks.
Hey, Jay. It's Tom.
Hi, Tom. We have Greg Fernandez on as well.
Hey, Greg.
Hello.
Give it about another minute and then go from there. I would like to say that, this session was scheduled for Tom Saxon of Box Top TV, and he had a conflict that arose, so he'll be speaking next, the last Wednesday of January, which I think is January 25th, at the usual time slot. And that's a company that has a toll-free broadband service, not necessarily mobile, but it is toll-free broadband. And I met with Thomas at ECOM 2011 in San Francisco, and we had a good discussion about what they have going, and I think it definitely dovetails with the opportunities for the toll-free industry here in the U.S. So, and just a reminder for everybody that the PhoneWord Forums are held on the last Wednesday of every month, same time, 4 p.m. Eastern. And as of last month, we opened up lines around the world that people can dial in locally, like in Australia and the Czech Republic and the UK and so forth. So So why don't we go ahead and get started and see if some other people chime in. Do you guys have any things you'd like to cover? Any items of...
Not on my part.
Okay. Tom, what about you?
Are you planning on talking about the conference on the 6th, the 14th, or the 20th?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty
Then
much.
I'll just listen, and if I've got questions, we'll chime in.
Okay. Tom, were you able to view those?
I viewed the 6th, the 14th, and about half of the TAC one. I didn't get through it, just too many other things going on. But there were a couple of noteworthy comments on that one that I think are probably worth talking about, and I don't know what you're planning on talking about, so maybe it'll just come up by itself.
Okay. Noteworthy comments on the TAC workshop or meeting?
Well, yes, I guess. I mean, ultimately, they pretty much alluded to the other two being, jumpstart activities. They also would, lead me to believe that panelists from those, specifically the panelists that are in academia, will go back to their colleges, their universities, and they're going to assign graduate students to, come up with some sort of resolutions. And I don't know if that's normal or if that's unusual. I mean, I guess I just can't comment on that. But I mean, some of the other comments coming out of that TAC meeting, the voice over analog and TDM is just going away organically. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. That people want to know what they're transitioning to and not transitioning from. And then I thought there was really an interesting piece on backward compatibility. And there was a comment that what services will survive and which ones won't, which will need backward compatibility and which ones won't. And in the first session on the 6th, well, even on the second session on the 14th, in roughly 10 hours of viewing, I didn't hear toll-free mentioned one time. Yet in the TAC viewing, their comments about things, are going to die or may not die, or maybe we'll try to figure out some backward compatibility for them, maybe we won't. I get out of those comments, it's what they're not saying that I think is more important than what they are saying, at least relative to our industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so great. I think those are definitely good points to cover. And, I'd just like to say that for folks that might listen to this and are new to the PhoneWord Forum, I'll give a little bit of the history. This is a conference call that's been going on for a little over a year now, about a year and a half. And it primarily was focused on toll-free telephone numbering in North America and the toll-free telephone number industry. And I would say it's broadened since the origin to be about telephone numbering and addressing and telecommunications, media delivery, next generation network, and just a host of contemporary topics. And probably some of the most interesting part of it is the governance questions that are coming up and that are becoming part and parcel with communications, with media, with social networking. We've gone through a period over the last few years where all of a sudden, communications, media, etc. Hello.
Good morning. Les here from Telsmart in Melbourne, Australia.
Hi, Les. Welcome.
Sorry I'm late, Jay.
It's okay. We're delighted to have you join us.
Fantastic.
Love to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in Australia with the shared usage market and what we would call shared usage and so forth. But anyway, we were starting to talk about I was giving a little bit of the history of the PhoneWord Forum, because this monthly conference call started based upon and focused upon our toll-free industry, but it's grown from there into a number of areas. And certainly last month's call with the folks from Australia that are part of the Australian Communications and Media Authority, that was I thought, a very, very good call. And I got some feedback after that I think really opened up some possibilities here in North America. So, I think that was a key conversation that demonstrated to some folks here in North America that, hey, something new is possible in the allocation of telephone numbering. So, just to bring everybody up to speed who might not know, for about the last year, there's been a committee in the Federal Communications Commission that's been looking at, what would it take to transition from the public switch telephone network into an all Internet Protocol network or an all IP network. And, this committee called the Technical Advisory Council has sort of, diligently worked away throughout the balance of the year. And they've worked in conjunction with something that I think is key to keep in mind, which is the shift from the $8 billion a year Universal Service Fund being funded by the legacy public switch telephone network, or PSTN is what I'll refer to it from this point on. So that $8 billion a year coming from the PSTN, how do they move that funding from the legacy network into the contemporary network, which is the Internet Protocol network? And that is well underway, and there's actually going to be some events coming up hosted by the FCC that will be updating folks on that whole process and where it's at. But I can assure you that process is well underway, and that's not going to take years and years for that process to happen. I've heard that possibly as early as 2014 that at least 50% of that funding might have been shifted to the Internet from the legacy telephone network. But, certainly the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, has a keen interest in moving the funding from the legacy telephone network, which is, declining in subscribership rapidly, to the contemporary Internet, funding Internet and broadband service for what they deem as, underserved areas and underserved populations. So that interest, and I would classify it as a keen interest on the part of the FCC to move that funding, in conjunction with, I would also say there's very keen interest on the part of the major carriers, Verizon and AT&T, to shut down as soon as possible the public switch telephone network, the PSTN, because they've got a declining subscribership, and yet their costs are pretty much fixed to keep the PSTN up and running as best as possible. So, some people seem to think that it will take years and years for the PSTN to, be wound down or for the transition to occur. And, I look at it from the economic incentives of both the regulatory body and the major carriers. And what I got out of these 3 key conferences or workshops that were held this month was that the dollar, the monetary incentives are high for both the FCC as well as the major carriers to move this along as rapidly as possible. And I think that it's very clear from the amount of effort, energy, the composition of these committees, the time, the talent, the focus that's on this issue that, this is going to happen sooner rather than later. And it's particularly relevant to the toll-free telephone number industry here in North America because right now, if today you shut off the PSTN, toll-free numbers would not work. And the benchmark that everybody can look at and gauge, this dependency on the PSTN for toll-free telephone numbering to work is, can you send a text message to a toll-free telephone number in North America? And the answer is you cannot. And as long as that is the case, the toll-free telephone numbers are dependent upon the existence of the PSTN. So I'm going to be quiet and open it up for you guys to ask any questions or, provide your take on what you've seen in these proceedings over the last 30 days.
So, Jay, really what you're talking about there is the backward compatibility piece.
Right. I think when they were talking about the backward compatibility in terms of equipment, if my grandmother has a rotary dial phone, that she's used since 1935 or whatever, I think the question comes up as to, how are you going to get Grandma Carpenter off of that rotary dial phone? And the answer is you might not have to, because there are certain adapters that can be added to legacy equipment that allow it to seamlessly
mimic
interconnect.
Pulse rather than the tone.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Because, the one part of that section of that workshop on backward compatibility, the most interesting piece was certain services that will just die off or disappear over time, and it isn't 100% necessary. And that couple of minutes, and I don't even remember where it was, but I thought that was interesting, because it's like unless specific industries, i.e. the alarm industry, they're raising their hand and they want to be a part of the conversation, I don't see them getting addressed. And I don't see toll-free, again, in over 10 hours of watching that stuff, it wasn't brought up one time. And I don't know that anyone at the regulatory level, if we want to call it that, has even given that 1 second of consideration. Because if they had given it 1 second of consideration, at least they would have mentioned it, that it is going to be addressed or it is not going to be addressed. You've got all the TTY people. You have so many people participating in those workshops. And again, for the 400th time, no one from the toll-free industry. Mm-hmm. So I am a little concerned about it maybe becoming more difficult than an adapter translating pulse tones to whatever you call the other tones,
Yeah. Well, there is no backward compatibility for the PSTN in the realm of the toll-free numbers in North America. So, as of today. So there is no adapter. There is no, intermediate piece of equipment you could put in so the toll-free telephone numbers would work on the IP network exclusively. And that's because of the way the call is set up when it's originally made. There's a lookup that happens in the database. And, just for those of you that just a little background, in February 2010, I was invited to come and speak to the SMS 800 Executive Committee, the people that run the toll-free database and services, et cetera, not only the people but also their vendors and so forth. And they basically said, hey, Jay, you've been looking at this for some years. How could toll-free numbers move into the contemporary and become internet or IP compatible? And I spent about 2 hours, in a room full of about 30 people, explaining how that might happen. And there's basically 2 ways it might happen. Number one is the existing database for toll-free numbers in North America. It might be possible to take that and add internet functionality to it. I think the probability of that happening is almost 0. The other way to do it is to set up a totally new database that runs in parallel to the existing SMS 800 and have a path so that people could migrate from the legacy platform to the contemporary platform. And I think that's the most likely way that this is going to happen, and certainly the most likely way that this could happen in a time frame that would match or dovetail with what's going on in the rest of the realm. But to my knowledge,
if SMS board is not sharing that information, whether in February 2010 or December 2011, to people on the TAC or commissioners themselves in some sort of an open FCC forum, how is it that they're going to know about that?
I don't know. I mean, the other dimension is that, in my view, if I was wearing a different hat from a different participant in the toll-free industry, there would be incentives for me to want to keep exactly what's in place as long as possible, even though it would eventually result in toll-free telephone numbering becoming obsolete. And that's Jay Carpenter's view. My concern, we've all got fears, right? And my fear is that there is a set of incentives out there that would be just quite pleased. Well, there's a set of incentives that would be interested in seeing toll-free numbers decline and eventually just turned off along with the PSTN. That's my fear. But getting back to the toll-free numbers not being mentioned in this proceeding, what was mentioned, Tom, was there was sort of an awakening that I heard out of the workshops that, numbering and addressing is a key issue in this whole thing.
Yes.
So did you hear that as well?
Yes.
Yeah. And what you haven't heard in that last segment, the Technical Advisory Council, in the last hour or so, is they actually put up a PowerPoint of, topics they're going to be addressing. And one of the topics is enum. So, they talk about that. It is on the agenda, but you have to be cautious when you're talking about enum because there's a wide variety of flavors of enum. And another point that was made by one of the experts was that, there are some very thorny issues associated with the numbering realm. So, I think many, many people have recognized that telephone numbers that are fully internet functional is something that's very attractive, that is very compelling. I mean, this is an issue that's been worked on for like 11, 12 years. However, my experience is people get to a certain point in that, and then they get stopped. And they get stopped because of some of the policy issues. So, there have been some very, very smart people that have worked on this, and, they all eventually run into the same roadblocks. Hello? Somebody just joined?
Jay Carpenter.
Yes.
Paul Faust.
Hey, Paul. Welcome.
Long time no speak. How are you?
I'm doing well. So we have Greg Fernandez. We have Tom Ogle. We have Laz from Australia. And yourself, Paul Faust from Primary Wave. And
did you say Greg Fernandez?
That's right.
Which company is he with?
How's it going, Paul?
What's up, bud? How are you? Hello, everybody.
So anyway, we were just talking about the proceedings that have happened with the FCC regarding the transition from the PSTN to an all-IP network. And so, Tom, basically, I was encouraged because they did talk a lot about numbering. They do have enum on the agenda. However, out of the conversation that I heard about numbering, it's pretty clear to me that they're just getting introduced to IP functionality for telephone numbering, and my guess is they're going to run into some serious roadblocks as they move that conversation, down the road a little bit.
Because of policy implications or because of technology?
The technology is almost a given. The technology is a piece of cake.
Okay.
It's all policy. The privacy, the question of who's the rightful subscriber to the telephone number, the whole mindset that nobody owns a telephone number has to shift to who is the owner of the telephone number. And then, for telephone numbers to really be on a level playing field with internet domains, it's my view that the hidden value of telephone numbers, which is what they spell, that has to come to the surface. And as soon as telephone numbers are viewed as a phrase, then the question becomes, well, how do you start to move telephone numbers from one subscriber to another so that the full value of that phrase can be expressed? And, that's a huge hurdle for, much of the thinking that's in place around the PSTN. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess I go back to the workshop on the 6th and the section on disabilities when they're talking about, iPhones, screens that don't actually have buttons. And, this is it's kind of a sidebar. but there seems to be an issue with technology that doesn't have buttons, and I don't know if that ties into this or not, but do you know anything about that?
Well, in that same workshop, one of the people from the community of, hard of hearing and sight impaired expressed his surprise at how readily the iPhones have been adopted by that community. So,
yes, but he also said in an emergency for himself, he would pick up a phone that had buttons, not an iPhone.
yeah, I mean, there's going to be some.
I'm just wondering if, from a policy point of view, that has to be present, that the letters have to be associated with the number, that ABC must be associated with the number 2.
Well, that's an international standard now.
Okay.
So that issue's been settled some time ago. And, what happened in Australia was certainly, I think, part of the groundwork for the market-based allocation in Australia was paved by the international standard of letters to numbers on telephone keypads. So, because without that, Australia had some inconsistencies when it came to the keypads. And some had letters, some didn't, et cetera. So, I think there's going to be all sorts of nuances about this transition. And, we went through the same conversation when we transitioned from, analog TV to digital TV. We went through the same transition. We went through the same conversation when we went from, analog cellular to digital cellular. Now, granted, the stakes are arguably higher for this go-round, but these sort of transitions have been, crossed in the past. And if the incentive set is great enough, it happens. And, in my view, the incentive set is definitely great enough that you got two of the key gorillas, the carriers and the government, wanting this to happen ASAP. So I'd like to talk a little bit about. That's kind of the scary part of this whole conversation. I'd like to talk about what I see are some of the opportunities, because I think the opportunity in this realm is huge, and it's particularly huge for the toll-free industry. But it takes a little out-of-the-box thinking. So, what is the opportunity? Well, the opportunity, in my view, is that the hidden part of telephone numbers that really isn't expressed other than shared usage, which is, what does the thing spell? There's now a pathway for that to be fully expressed. So there's a pathway for not only telephone numbering in North America, but for that matter, the rest of the world, to shift from being primarily a numeric to a phrase. And that, in my view, is very exciting. So, like I said at the beginning of the call, the last call that we had, which was with the Australian equivalent of the FCC, after that call, I got some indications that there was some interest in, from the regulatory side, in pursuing the conversation. In terms of, what would it really look like to start to have telephone numbers be allocated via the market. Now, it's also my view that...
And that was by an FCC staffer or someone on the TAC committee, or?
It was by a couple of regulators that before, like 60 days ago, I would have been surprised if they had shown interest in this realm. So it wasn't by FCC people, but it was just by some key regulators that, I'm going to keep to myself. But just in the whole scheme of numbering and addressing, just to give you guys some perspective, there's a little bit over 200 million internet domains. The .coms, etc. But right now, there's over 5 billion mobile phone users in the world, and each one of those has a telephone number. And for the most part, with the exception of our industry in North America, for the most part, those numbers are presented as numbers versus words. And for the most part, when you talk to people about a telephone number, they have it in their mind that the experience is something like what we're experiencing right now, which is you're holding a device up to your ear and you're talking to other people that you can't see. You've got no data. You've got, no visual in front of you or anything else. So what I think is a huge opportunity at this juncture is ushering in a new paradigm for telephone numbering, which ushers in the phrase element of a telephone number as well as the full rich media capability that could be there with telephone number dialing, in addition to the traditional voice call. So, and one of the things that was on the list today was mobile, and I think the possibility for that the technology is ushering in today with mobile devices, handheld smartphones, which are really computers. The phone is one of the least used elements of the device. But what that ushers in is a huge, huge opportunity for our industry, where we have, I would say, expertise, insight into, what are the value points of this resource when it's presented as a phrase, i.e. telephone numbering. So, I think all you guys know that I've been working on this for a long time, and all I can tell you is I'm more optimistic now than I've ever been. And in spite of all, the awakening of the deadness of the PSTN, and how our industry hinges upon right now today hinges upon the PSTN being there and alive and working. I think there's a new pathway that the people in this industry can enjoy with what's happening with the technology, what's happening with mobile worldwide, etc. So, Laz, would you? I'll bet the folks on this call would be interested to get your take on what's going on in Australia with, your activity with the 1300 numbers, and 1-800 numbers. Can you kind of give us a summary?
In which aspect?
Well, just in terms of, how are small to medium businesses, and for that matter, large businesses, using the numbers? What are you seeing in terms of the willingness for businesses to, subscribe to a number that spells a phrase? What sort of marketing is happening with your company and other companies in Australia around the phone words? I think just some sort of sense, and what sort of changes have you seen over time, over the last 3-4 years? What's the greatest thing that's happening in your business, and what's the most concerning thing? Let's put it that way.
Okay. I think a lot of the companies that advertise a phone word or a phone number that spells a word, I think it's increasing. People are getting quite used to texting, so it's very easy for them to convert from using a number to a phone word, 1-800 Builder, for example. So we're seeing an increase in companies taking advantage of using phone words to increase their marketing, basically. So our business, Telsmart, we're what we do is we license and sell phone words that we acquire from ACMA. It is rising every year, the awareness. As you mentioned before, Joe, there's a standardised keypad now, international keypad. Initially, I think it would have been maybe, say, 12 years ago, we had different keypads. There were numbers on the number one key. There were, I think, letters. I think it was Q, or there were a couple of letters. The major companies in Australia, the banks, travel companies and so forth, promote phone words excessively. Some companies actually brand themselves with a phone word. 13Find, 1300 Flowers, 1-800 Flowers, and so forth. So the awareness is quite big in Australia. What else can I say? Issues, I suppose, we can text to our inbound numbers as well. Not available from all the carriers, though. So that there's some resistance with some companies promoting texting to their inbound number, because it doesn't work on all the carriers. It works, I think, on about 75% of the carriers in Australia, the major three. That's probably at the moment the biggest hurdle with toll-free numbers, or people promoting. I've got a couple of clients that would love a phone word, but don't want to go down that path because the texting is not available on all the networks.
But it's only been a year or two, couple of years since texting has been available for your.
That's correct. I think it was late last year. Yes.
Okay. But you
so
have
there are some. Sorry.
I was just going to say you have seen an uptake in that realm where people are setting up.
Yes. At the moment, texting doesn't work on Overdial, so we have a number range here in Australia, like 1-3 range, which has a total of 6 digits, so 1-3 followed by 4 other numbers. For example, 1-3 Ford Motor Company. If you were to use another company with 5 digits, 1-3 Lexus, for example, it wouldn't work. The texting at the moment, it doesn't recognise the Overdial. Whereas the the overdial works when you call, make a physical call to that number.
Mm-hmm. And so the texting has been a valuable component, even though some people are reluctant to introduce it because it's not
Available to
100%, right?
for sure, yeah, because it's a great way to gauge, individual, advertising responses. You could have a commercial during a base, for example, a baseball game on a Friday night. You could have a message, text blue to whatever number, and they can gauge individual responses, a different code word or keyword, in a newspaper, radio advertisement, and so forth. So it's a great tool. It was available to 100% of the market, but it's not available.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's the problem at the moment. Something different to your status in the US is that, our calls it's not gauged by where the call's made. So it's a fully national call. From my understanding,
Mm-hmm.
you guys, if you're in Los Angeles and you were to call someone in New York, it goes through different carriers. Is that correct?
It might go through different carriers.
And is there different charges involved?
No, not really on the toll-free. It's pretty much a, fixed per minute rate to the recipient of the call. Now,
to the recipient of the call.
Yeah. So as a business, if I've got a landscaping business and I've got a toll-free number out there, 1-800-LANDSCAPE, I'm going to be paying a certain per minute rate. Doesn't really matter where the call is coming from. The problem now, there are some people that really get into it and slice and dice the traffic and allocate traffic to different carriers based upon different rates at different times of day, and so there are some differentials, and some people are actually migrating toll-free traffic onto the IP network as soon as possible to minimize those calls, or the minimize the charges associated with those calls. So, I would say it's kind of yes and no in terms of the differential on the, where's the call coming from and so forth. And a lot of that is gamed, here in the U.S., which reflects the legacy platform to the contemporary platform has opened up some gaming on the charges and so forth. But I would say the bigger thing that we face in North America is how to route the call, based on where the caller is at. And that's something that I think you guys in Australia, from what I know, you don't quite have the same issues that we have. Because we generally have routed our calls in the past based upon the telephone number of the caller. But with people moving around the country, that whole architecture has kind of broken down. So,
what's an example of that? What do you mean?
Well, for instance, my number is 602, 228-4486. That's my cell phone number.
Yep.
And the 602 area code has historically been associated with Arizona. But when people move, like if I move to California or New York, I would still keep my telephone number, my 602 telephone number. And the way our industry has parceled out the calls in the past is we look at the 602 telephone number and we say, okay, this fellow's calling from Arizona when actually I'm in New York, and I don't want to go to a Lexus dealership in New York or in Arizona. I want to go to a Lexus dealer in New York. And if the Lexus dealer finds out that they're not getting all their calls, they're not very happy. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand. Don't you guys have a like a pin prompt like we have here in Australia, where you choose what state or what city you want, or voice recognition?
Well, those are some of the sort of stopgap measures that some people have implemented, but it's not as elegant as we would like it to be. So in other words, we don't want to ask, we want the caller to do as little as possible. Callers don't know what zip code they're in. They don't know, on certain Saturday nights, they don't even know what state they're in. So, you just don't want to ask them to say anything into the phone or even enter any digits in. But
what about geographical routing, where it automatically pick up where you are and then transfer you to the local Lexus dealership? If you're in Arizona, they say unless you left your car in New York, you'd want to speak to the Lexus dealership in Arizona.
We don't have that. It's
okay.
My understanding your cellular network has that geographic location information that the cellular carriers are willing to allow you to use to route your calls. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. Which is not always, it's great if you've got one location in a large city. If you've got a break-up model and you've got multiple locations, like a Subway store, you might have 20 or 30 stores in a large city or a larger town, and then there's a problem there.
Mm-hmm.
Geographic works great because it's really just one location per city.
Mm-hmm.
Because it works on the strength of it works on the strength of the towers and so forth. So you could be in the same location, doesn't mean, and you could be transferred to two different Domino's pizza stores, which has happened to me in the city here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jack's given an example in the past as well, where he's on Bondi Beach and he'll be transferred to a different location that's probably 15 miles away compared to something that he wanted 3 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
So geography isn't that accurate, but it takes the guesswork out from the consumer making the call.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like even though you've got maybe a better set of services than what we have, it still sounds like there's some pitfalls in it.
It just depends on the size of the business. There's different answers or solutions depending on what the business owner wants. It's very complex. It's still not 100%. You'd choose a voice recognition system where you'd mention or say the suburb or the city that you wanted to call, or the location, and then that could drop down to even streets and so forth. But then there's problems there with language barriers, there's accents, noisy rooms, elevators, car phones, Bluetooth. So it's not 100%, and it's probably not the best user experience possible. Probably the best solution would be for the call to go to a call center, and someone will then divert the call to the right location if there's multiple sites.
Mm-hmm.
Or a pin prompt where you'd enter your zip code. And as you mentioned, if you're an international or interstate traveller, you wouldn't necessarily know where what zip code you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different pitfalls depending on the size of the business and what they want and how they want the call to be answered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I mean, that's one of the things that I'm excited about is because I think there's yet another realm that addresses this, which is if you dial 13 Ford on your smartphone and you've got, 4 or 5 Ford dealers in Melbourne, what might be even better is if you've got a map that pops up and, you can pick simply by touching the screen, what dealer is most conducive to whatever you need.
Sure.
So that's part of what I think is available with having internet functionality associated with telephone numbering, is that, you don't have to put your callers through press 1 for this and 2 for that and so forth. They can dial a number, 13 Ford, and they've got an immediate menu that comes up that says, do you want to go to service? Do you want to go to sales? Do you want to go to the dealer that's 5 miles away or 3 miles away or 15 miles away? It's just, it's a more efficient interaction.
Yeah.
So,
And it's similar to you just going straight to Google at the moment and typing Ford dealerships Melbourne. The small Google map will come up in Google Maps and a list based on probably your current IP address where you are.
mm-hmm.
And the local might spit out another 5 or 10 the dealerships that are closer to you.
Mm-hmm. Right. But it also spits out the dealership's competition, which,
of course it does.
yeah, from the dealer standpoint is not very appealing.
Of course, I know. Yep.
Yeah, and actually, we could spend some time on this, but having looked at this realm, I think it's also there's also some friction from the caller side too, where a Google search is inferior to what's possible if you've got a telephone number that's internet functional. So, any other things you'd like to share with us, Laz, in terms of what's going on in the Australian market that's exciting in this area?
I suppose the texting was a really big thing, so but that pretty much fizzled out with not all the telcos coming on board. That's probably the biggest, as I mentioned before, the biggest hurdle. In regard, I think the uptake of phone words is increasing. Probably the prices that we license words, I think on average are coming down. But there still are some great leases going out in the marketplace and some huge sales. And our phone words or our numbers, they're fully transferable. They can be the ownership can be swapped. Can be traded. Can be leased. There's a lot of functionality to what we have here in Australia.
What are some of the biggest sales that have occurred with phone words down there? How much?
The outright sale, 2.2 million, is the biggest sale. That's in the public arena at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Is that 1-800-Flowers?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So that was $2.2 million Australian.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Which
and
is
that would
somewhere
have occurred
around.
when that would have occurred probably when the Australian dollar was maybe 90 cents, 85 cents. So it would have been around $2 million US.
Right.
Yes. So
So-
there's a lot of phone words that sell from from $100,000 upwards.
hmm
They're for your more your generic type words.
hmm But you guys don't, and just to keep things in perspective, I think the population of Australia is around 23 million people.
That's correct.
And so there is a market factor there.
Our market's a lot smaller than your market. That's correct.
Yeah. But you also don't really have an organized secondary market, right?
In what aspect?
So in other words, there's no real eBay for phone words down in Australia.
Listen, there are some companies that have tried to brokerage deals with phone words that I own or other people in our space own, but it hasn't really been effective.
hmm Yeah, so even if they put up a site that had maybe, 50 or 100 phone words with corresponding prices, it was just a small listing of the phone words that were available relative to all the phone words that were available. Is that correct?
What do you think? Probably not. Listen, in our market at the moment, if you jump on our governing body, ACMA's website, and you did a number search, it come up there with the owner of that phone word and their full contact details. So if you were in Australia and you wanted to buy, and you're a Ford dealership, and I'll use that as an example. I'll use Lexus as an example, 13 Lexus, and you want to search the owner of 13 Lexus, you jump on ACMA's website, and you do a number search, and you eventually come back to the I own the phone with my full contact details.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in the public domain.
Right, but it doesn't have a field where you could say, if somebody's willing to give me $75,000 or $250,000 for this number, it's yours. So in other words,
one
there's
advertises. There isn't a lot of people that publicly advertise what a phone number's worth.
Right.
I wouldn't put my numbers on a publicly available list to show what they're worth.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is to talk to a client, build up the value proposition of a phone number, the phone word, and then give them a price.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was talking to a client a couple of weeks ago, a potential client, and they just had a normal an inbound number, wasn't even a toll-free number. And I was talking to them, and they couldn't even believe at the moment they pay nothing to receive a call. So it's a normal inbound number, 03 followed by the number, and now they have to get their head around how. So I need now a toll-free number. We'll have to pay for a call plus a licensing fee. So you have to build a value proposition around what that number could be worth to their business. Mm-hmm. By saving them money on advertising, increased brand awareness. They can match their URL as well. There's a lot of ways you can build the value proposition in companies adopting a phone word. And that's what we do. And so just to have a number out there in open space, I think it's not. I personally wouldn't want 13 Lexus out there in the public space for sale for $100,000 because most people look and say, "What? It's just a phone number."
Mm-hmm.
But if you build up a business case and a proposition and showing where they can save money, then you may get that $100,000.
Mm-hmm.
But depending on the Lexus dealership, how much do you spend on advertising and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that secondary market that you're talking about, there are a few companies out there that do advertise availability of other people's phone numbers, and then if they got an inquiry in Sydney on one of my numbers, then they'll call me and say, "Listen, lads, I've got someone that's interested in one of your numbers, and you might do a profit share or a finder's fee or something, or a commission-based deal with that other third party, I suppose.
Mhm. Yeah, well, kind of, and we're past the top of the hour, and we'll wrap it up here in a minute. But more, what I had in mind was, what takes place in the internet domain realm, where there are auctions, there's some history, showing what domains sold for over time, and there's more of a nucleus of interest and activity and transferability in the internet domain realm. And even though you have a government website that shows, definitive subscribership to your phone words, it still has some elements that could be put into place that would make it a more fluid market, in my view. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we are at the top of the hour, and this is designed to be an hour-long call, so I'll just open it up. Are there any questions, any comments that anyone would like to add?
Good discussion. I'm glad I joined.
Okay. All right. Well, Happy New Year to everyone on the call. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your comments. And let's see what we can do to make 2012 a phenomenal year for what's possible.
All right. Good enough. Thank you, Jay.
Good.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
Happy New Year to everyone.